David Cameron basically telling us that the previous strikes we did on the Houthi rebels didn't seem to make much difference at all. But we did it again last night anyway. Was the UK right to strike the Houthis again? Will it make any difference at all? What's the end game here? And how on earth will we achieve it? And get this, everyone, lower than expected government borrowing has given Jeremy Hunt a little bit of wiggle room ahead of the budget in March. So what should he do with this extra money? Should he spend more on public services, cut our taxes, or neither? You tell me. And younger office staff are apparently not fully productive at work one day a week because they suffer with mental health. I've got to say, right, apparently we're on the edge of becoming a burnt-out nation. But what is going on? Why are older workers seemingly more productive than the young? And is mental health essentially the new bad back? And there's a blur for Rishi Sunak now. As part of the Rwanda plan suffered its first defeat in the House of Lords. Many people are saying that the second chamber should be abolished. Others are saying it basically should be changed so that those within it are elected. What says you? Well, I've got a member of the House of Lords on my panel tonight, none other than Baroness Jacqueline Foster. So I'm fascinated about her thoughts on that final topic. But before we get stuck into it all, let's cross live for our 6 o'clock news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. Well, the top story tonight from the GB newsroom is that the Prime Minister says the UK will not hesitate to take further action in Yemen following a spate of attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Rishi Sunak described the attacks by Iranian-backed militants as illegal and unacceptable. It comes after last night's joint strike with the United States, which took place after a meeting with President Biden. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, backed the government's targeted action, and the Prime Minister signalled new sanctions to be announced in the coming days, warning further attacks would be met with a response.
We are not seeking a confrontation. We urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. But if necessary, the United Kingdom will not hesitate to respond again in self-defence. We cannot stand by and allow these attacks to go unchallenged. Inaction is also a choice.
Rishi Sunak. Well, the Met Office has warned today of strong winds and heavy rain across the whole of the UK as yet another storm sweeps in. This time she's called Storm Jocelyn, and she's battering Britain right now with amber and yellow alerts issued for much of the country, particularly the north. Yellow warnings for rain and ice are also in place across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. No trains will be running in Scotland from 7 o'clock tonight, with tomorrow's rush hour services also out of action. GB News reporter Jack Carson is on the Welsh coast. Our apologies, that clip isn't there. I'll play that to you in our next hour of news. Now, the measles outbreak has been described as deeply troubling, with Labour demanding more action to curb the spread of the disease. Shadow Health Minister Karen Smith says red tape needs to be cut to give health visitors more powers to vaccinate children. That's as cases grow in the West Midlands and parts of London. The World Health Organization has also issued fresh warnings following a surge across Europe. Dr Tamara Keith told GB News earlier that getting the jab is the only way to protect children.
Measles is not just a fever with a rash. It can cause all sorts of complications. It can give your child seizures, pneumonia. They can end up in hospital. And in the very worst cases, it can actually prove fatal. And I'm not saying that to scare people, but with a simple vaccination given to your child, you can protect them against measles. And so that really is the best thing you can do.
Now, the 4 people who were found dead at a house in Norfolk have been identified. 2 adults have been named as 45-year-old Bartlomiej Kuchenski and 36-year-old Kanticha Sukpenpanau. Meanwhile, 2 young girls were also named as Yasmin and Natasha Kuchenska. Their bodies were discovered at an address in Norwich last week. And a Nottingham University student showed incredible bravery, with the court being told she tried to protect her friend by fighting off a killer. In June last year, 32-year-old Valdo Kalakane killed Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar. He then later killed school caretaker Ian Coates. The killer had his not guilty plea accepted on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He also admitted trying to murder 3 pedestrians who were hit by a van on the morning of the attacks. In the United States, Donald Trump says he expects his last remaining Republican opponent to drop out after today's New Hampshire primary. Polls are pointing to a likely victory for the former president, but his opponent, Nikki Haley, has gained support and her exit isn't guaranteed. Anthony Scaramucci was Trump's director of communications during his time in the White House. He told GB News that Trump lacks the temperament to be an effective leader.
There are 20 cabinet members that work for Mr. Trump closely and directly alongside of myself. Now, granted, I was there for 11 days, but I did work for him for close to a year on the campaign. And we all saw the same thing, and we were all speaking out against his temperament to be the president of the United States. So things do change, facts change, and smart people change their opinion when the facts change.
Well, in news here at home, possible water contamination is being investigated at a housing estate near Cambridge. Residents at the Marley development are facing their 5th day without drinkable tap water. The Independent Water Network says it is safe for washing and showering. However, the cause of the contamination hasn't yet been confirmed. But the UK's Health Security Agency says it is investigating. No reports of any illnesses so far, but people are being urged to use bottled water until further notice in that area. And lastly, a new weight loss pill designed to make people feel fuller is now available on the NHS. The treatment can be delivered in 15 minutes in the form of a capsule that contains a gastric balloon which is filled with water. It requires no surgery, endoscopy or anaesthesia, and it's called Allurion. Well, that's the company behind the pill, and it says it's been in talks with the NHS since 2020 about rolling out that treatment for those who need it. That's the news on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. This is Britain's News Channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. The former Conservative MEP and the life peer in the House of Lords, Baroness Jacqueline Foster, alongside me, as is the contributing editor and Avara Media, Michael Walker. Good evening to both of you. I found that last story in the headlines absolutely fascinating, that weight loss pill. Did you see that? Would you be up for something like that? Do you struggle with your weight? Do you think that is the answer, swallowing pills that then fill you up with water? I have to confess, I've been very fortunate. I've never struggled with my weight. Touch wood, that doesn't change. But isn't it just as simple as eat less and move more? Am I missing something? Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you reach me. Or you can get in touch with me on Twitter at GBNews. Am I missing something, Michael?
I'm very much in favour of medication that can bring about weight loss. I thought at the beginning of that news report it was going to be Ozempic, which is obviously the one that lots of people are taking. I'm not sure why you'd go for this inflatable water balloon as opposed to Ozempic. Not that I'm here to advertise any drug company over another.
But and again, OK, I do confess, maybe I don't struggle. So, you know, I can't fathom, wouldn't you just eat less and then move more rather than subject yourself to injections this and pills that and balloons that? I'm sure you won't be backwards in getting in touch with me and telling me if you think that I am wrong. But look, let's cut straight into the big news story of the day. The UK and the US have launched yet another strike against Houthi rebels in Yemen. Look, let's just remind ourselves, because I found this quite an interesting key clip. You've just been hearing there in the news headlines that Rishi Sunak is basically saying, you know, it's all about self-defence and we will continue, so to speak. Keir Starmer essentially says, you know, I back these strikes too. But I found this one most fascinating from our Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron. Let's listen.
Since we last took action 10 days ago, there have been over 12 attacks on shipping by the Houthis in the Red Sea. These attacks are illegal, they're unacceptable, and what we've done again is send the clearest possible message that we will continue to degrade their ability to carry out these attacks whilst sending the clearest possible message.
I hear you. You mentioned it a couple of times then, the clearest possible message. Well, that message is not that clear, or if it is, it's not being received and kind of shared by the Houthi rebels, because as he says there's been about 12 strikes. I think the US have done about 8 strikes, so clearly they're not going to pack it in. So, I mean, are these strikes worth it?
Well, there was an even better clip, I think, last week where Joe Biden was asked, is this working? And he said, well, is it stopping the Houthis firing their rockets? No. Will we keep doing it? Yes.
Right.
And so there's this admission that they're completely incapable of doing anything here. Now, for me, this is a clear example of why it is not in Britain's strategic interest to support Israel to do whatever it wants in Gaza. Right? We have our politicians who keep standing up and saying, we believe in a two-state solution.
But hang on, you're linking that because basically the Houthis are saying we're doing what we're doing in the Red Sea because we want to stand by Palestine and we think there's a genocide being committed. But the pushback to that is that basically people are saying, well, hang on, that's not true, Houthis, because basically you're targeting pretty much any ship that goes on, not just those Israeli origin or destined.
Well, they're letting the Chinese ships through, they're letting the Russian ships through. I think they've actually only started systematically targeting the American and the British ones since the Americans and the British started bombing the Houthis, right? And this argument that it's got nothing to do with Gaza, I saw both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak stand up in Parliament and make that claim. Now, to me, that's just completely juvenile. This wasn't happening before Israel was bombarding Gaza. And in that brief ceasefire we had last November, if you remember, during that period in time, these attacks didn't happen either. So it's very clear that this is directly related to what's going on in Gaza. The Houthis actually, have had the Palestinians as central to their ideology for a long time. Doesn't mean you have to agree with what they're doing, but I think to disconnect this from the war in Gaza would be fundamentally mistaken.
Then?
Well, I mean, I would be pressuring Israel to bring about a ceasefire, right? I don't know why we are backing to the hilt a government which is proactively saying our vision for this region is completely different to yours.
Jacqueline, are the UK doing the right thing with these strikes?
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking here about yet another terrorist group. They're proxies of Iran. And in actual fact, they've been causing problems for the last 10 years. So, of course, things have escalated since October the 7th. And we know they'd kicked off on the 13th, but what they are basically causing is a blockade for a huge amount of shipping through the Red Sea, and that's not allowed under international maritime laws. There's no justification for it. They have openly said that they are supporting their brothers, their Palestinian cause, and people will support all sorts of causes, but there's still no justification for that. They're supported by North Korea, they're supported by Syria. Iran is pulling the strings, because Iran pulls the strings not just on, obviously, the Houthis. Obviously, it was ISIS, it's Hamas, it's Hezbollah. So this is a collective push, really, and obviously, and using it against Israel. We can go into the whole Israeli debate if you like. I have no intentions of backing off my position, which was that Israel was attacked on October the 7th. There were hundreds of people, men, women and children who were slaughtered. There were, and these were war crimes at the very beginning. We still have hostages in place. And so, of course, we can widen that debate too. But if we want to bring this back, this is just not acceptable. And America and the UK, it's mainly our shipping and some other countries in Europe. A lot of shipping is getting through. You're quite right. We also know that there's a Russia involvement here. I mean, if we look at what happened in October, my view is, and people can agree or disagree with me, this was also, I think Hamas also attacked because it was also a good diversion because Russia wasn't doing very well in Ukraine. And Russia obviously is a supporter of Iran. And the tentacles of all of this go much wider. So this is a big geopolitical issue. And so I think we have to show our strength. Otherwise, your energy costs, everything that we're bringing through the Red Sea, this is not acceptable.
I want to bring Michael back in a sec. But before we get into the geopolitical side of things, as you've just been hearing, though, the strikes, the warning shots, the multiple strikes by the US, the now second strike by the UK, it's not really making much difference, not being that effective.
Well, we'll see. It's only
but we are seeing.
No, but what you've got to remember is this is against international maritime law. You have people here who are pirates, basically. There are laws about all of this.
But David Cameron, I mean, I've just literally played him saying that since we did the last strike, there's been another 12.
Of course. But it doesn't mean because you just strike once that everything stops. They're clearly pushing the boundaries, but that doesn't mean to say that we stop.
What do you
we
think?
We have to look and see how they've made some strikes, then they see what the reactions are. We know that there are discussions and debates going on all over the time in the background with Qatar and various other organisations. So this is a complex issue. It's not straightforward. But should we stop because the first couple of retaliatory attacks have not stopped it properly yet? No, the answer is no. They are breaking international maritime law. These are pirates and these are terrorists, and also the lives of the crew on these ships is in danger. And you must not forget that.
No, I certainly do not forget it.
Not you personally.
I just wonder whether or not actually everyone attacking everyone else is just making the situation worse, because the US have done 8 strikes. Like I just said, this is our second one. They're not stopping. You tell me, do you think this is a fruitful strategy? Just keep going and they'll keep going and then what? You tell me. Michael, do you want to come back in?
Well, I suppose just on the geopolitical point, yes, there are lots of geopolitical interests here. I think you somewhat simplified it because Iran weren't backing ISIS. Iran were actually fighting ISIS. The Saudis were backing ISIS. So you've got lots of different interests and groups fighting each other. And so it's not as simple as there's the good guys and the bad guys. I think it's probably useful for your audience to sort of understand why these attacks are failing. Because people think, the Houthis, they're a militant group in one of the poorest countries in the world. It is the poorest country in the Middle East. How can the most advanced militaries in the world not defeat them quickly? And the issue is that now, because drones and missiles have become so cheap, right, anyone can buy a drone, and you don't need a military base to really launch it, the Houthis can launch these drones from anywhere. Yemen's quite a big place, lots of mountainous regions. So the idea that you can just knock this out from the sky, to me, doesn't seem that plausible. And you're right that this hasn't been going on for very long. So, this has only been a few days. It could be that suddenly it starts working. But we do have recent evidence here because the Saudis have been bombing Yemen for 8 years. Right? They've actually created one of the biggest humanitarian catastrophes in the world before what's happened in Gaza. So what's happened in Gaza is worse, but what was happening in Yemen was already awful. And that only strengthened the Houthis because it's very difficult to bomb these groups out of existence if they have local support.
Nobody's saying that, but you've got Reaper drones from the Houthis that Houthis have been using also against Israel. They were in Eilat. So you're going back to November. So they're not just in the Red Sea, they're also attacking Israel as well. So, this is why I'm saying this is wide-ranging. And there isn't, you're right, there isn't one simple solution, somebody stops A or stops B, because it's far more complex than this. But you've still got to get to the bottom of this. And this isn't just about UK and US shipping. This is about how we are moving our trade with free movement under international law. People keep talking to me about international law. Well, there's clear international laws of the sea. And they say that nobody is allowed to stop vessels going from A to B. And what they are doing is completely against international law. They are being encouraged by Iran and its other proxies, and it's not acceptable.
Well, never mind international law for a second. Where's China in all of this? Because if you park international law and maritime law and whatever, if you just look at cold, hard economics, a lot of this stuff, we buy pretty much everything, exaggerating slightly, but you get my point, from places like China.
Yeah.
So, ultimately, some of these places are going to find their bottom line hit if actually some of their shipments just simply cannot get to where it is that they need to be getting. So why aren't they piping up?
Well, I think China are very canny. And we know China has its fingers in a lot of pies. And they support very quietly, various things that go on. We know that Russia does as well. The people that will pay at the end of this, if you talk about another week or fortnight it would take if you had to go the long way around South Africa, the people who will pay at the end of the day is the consumer. So I don't think it necessarily affects that much the manufacturer. It will depend on all the costs. They're all passed on to the consumer at the end of the day, and it's the energy and some important stuff that we do import. Actually, it will be the British public.
Graham says this is very simple, Michelle. The strikes upon the Houthis are absolutely, fully justified, he says. And and can you also point out to Michael that Israel has got every right to defend themselves, he says.
But not necessarily to kill 25,000 people, bomb hospitals and starve the territory.
We'll have a debate about that one day.
Well, there you go, Graham. What do you make to what Michael just had to say? Ron says, Michelle, what are you suggesting? That we just let these rebels halt world navigation? What are you going to do next? Give them the consent to rule the world? Absolutely not. I don't think anyone should be able to randomly just accost ships. I'm just wondering, is the strategy that we currently have the right one? Joe says, Michelle, I do agree with the strikes, but I can't help wondering how come Biden puts us at the front of the queue when it comes to backing him with military action, but apparently at the back of the queue when it comes to doing trade deals with us. Either we've got a special relationship or we don't. What do you make to all of that? Get in touch and let me know. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you get a hold of me tonight. I want to talk to you after the break about money. Apparently, we've got a little bit extra sloshing around. What should the Chancellor do with it then? Should he give all of us tax cuts? Should he invest in public spending? Or should he just sit there and think, do you know what? Let's not do anything with that extra money. Get in touch, you tell me.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
be in politics.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co on GB News till 7. The former Conservative MEP and life peer in the House of Lords, Baroness Jacqueline Foster, alongside me, and the contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker, will be coming on to the House of Lords before the end of the programme. I'll be fascinated to hear Jacqueline's thoughts on this one. Some people saying it's time for the whole chamber to be abolished. Others saying people need to be elected into it. Where are you on that one? I just want to pick back up on that conversation that we just had before the break, because it did rumble on during that break, and it was all about, the essence. The Houthi rebels are basically saying that they're doing this, the shipping, disrupting shipping in the Red Sea, because of what's going on in Palestine. Many people dispute that. But Jacqueline, your thoughts on what's going on with the Israel-Gaza conflict?
Well, I mean, obviously you're in a war situation. The Israelis, and there are 2 million Arabs live in Israel. 1.6 million Palestinians live in Israel. Most will probably be Muslim. There is no issue. They are Israeli citizens, and they have the same quality of life as everybody else. So it's a myth to think that anybody who is Palestinian is living somewhere else. They are not. We have a terrorist organisation, and they attacked Israel. They went into a sovereign state. They slaughtered...
Hamas, we're talking about.
Hamas,
yeah.
Of course. They slaughtered, 12 or 1,300 younger people who were at a music festival. We had the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, and a suicide bomber blew up those children. People need to start thinking of the consequences of this. This has been going on for a long time. And it spread its tentacles, terrorism. It's like a cancer. So they went in there. There were civilian men with them as well. So there were hundreds of them. They then took hostages, and it wasn't just, let's take all the men. They took men, women and children. They raped and they murdered and they slaughtered. And I have seen the uncut footage, which has been available to the UN and international press for a long time. And it was absolutely horrendous. Nobody wants to see Palestinian civilians injured or killed. I don't. But the consequences of Hamas's actions were that, naturally, they are going to retaliate. They have to, because you're protecting your sovereign state. And what Hamas do is they hide behind the women and children, and they have always done that. They've always done that. So even when Israel said to them, you need to move your civilians south, because we're going to be targeting with the tunnels. They spent billions on tunnels. Money should have gone to the people. And they were shooting their own civilians in the back because they wanted to move to the south. We've got the footage of it, and that's the reality.
So you're absolutely...
If they release the hostages, then I believe there could be a ceasefire and we can get some solution. Hamas needs to surrender, because that is what they are. They are a terrorist group, and there was no justification for what they did.
But you don't even think they are a terrorist group, Michael.
Well, I think there's two issues with what you said there. So I think the big issue is you're sort of framing what Israel are doing as a counter-terrorism operation. Now, if you listen to what Israel are actually saying, what they are saying is they want to clear the people out of Gaza.
Do you think I don't listen to what Israel's saying?
Well, I think if you were, you would have a somewhat different analysis, because...
No, I don't have a different... I'm hearing very clearly.
You've spoken for a long time, so I'll speak for a while
but you
now.
don't misrepresent...
OK, I won't mention you at all in my answer. I'll say some people...
You say your points.
I think many people misrepresent what is going on, because they suggest what Israel is doing is a counter-terror operation. What the Israeli politicians are themselves saying is what they want to do is make Gaza unlivable so all of the people leave. Now, Netanyahu's being very explicit about this at the moment. He's saying, I do not believe in a two-state solution. I want Israel to control the whole territory. Now, I would say that is the reality that led to October the 7th. That doesn't justify it whatsoever, but that's clearly some context that led to it. I also think that many of the things I'll say some people have discussed, which is to sort of keep going back to the events of October the 7th and the hostages, what they are essentially sort of endorsing is collective punishment, because there are women, children, entire families, entire generations being killed day after day after day after day. And you can't kill civilians as leverage to try and get a group to release hostages.
You missed a point. The Abraham Accords, which Saudi was buying into, and other countries have been buying into, and the relationships that have built up, like UAE and others, with Israel, that have been working on for a long time, the Abraham Accords looks at a two-state solution.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. That's why the Palestinians oppose it, and that's why Netanyahu goes on television every day and says, I will block a two-state solution.
Don't talk over each other.
The leaders of the Palestinian groups, as such, never wanted one from the first one, when even in 1948, never agreed to it, and they didn't even from the Oslo Accords that followed. So we know what their position is. It's third parties, it's other countries that have tried to come out and find a solution. And the Israeli government has not been opposed to looking at a two-state solution.
There is an organisation.
We're in a different ballgame
the
now.
Palestinian Authority, so the leaders of the Palestinians say they want a two-state solution. Netanyahu keeps going on television and saying he's absolutely opposed to a two-state solution. So I think just believe what people say sometimes.
I think you need to just not take this. You need to look at the whole way it's evolved over the last 30 or 40 years.
There you go. Well, you can look at your evolution during the break, because before I get to that break, I do want to talk to you about matters here in this country, because we all know by now, don't we, we've got the next budget coming up in March. Well, long story short, government borrowing in December was nowhere near the level that it was expected to be. In fact, actually, it was the lowest December borrowing for about 4 years. It's got a lot of people excited. What they're saying is the interest on the debt, etc., was lower than expected because of things like a lower inflation rate and lower interest rates. What should we do? I mean, I'm a bit reluctant to even say this is extra cash, not having to borrow as much money as you thought you might. To me, you know, I'm quite frugal, I'm quite tight, so I wouldn't necessarily be going, oh, and therefore I'll spend that money on whatever. But some people are suggesting, well, what we should be doing, this is extra cash. We should be spending it on tax cuts. Other people are saying, actually, we should be spending it, investing it more in public services. Where are you, Jacqueline?
Well, I don't believe that more money needs to be invested in public services. I do actually think that the whole ship, in terms of all public services, I think it needs to be tightened up. We know there's phenomenal waste, and that goes from local authorities, goes to government departments. Look at the NHS. We look at, you know, education. There's various ways, I think, that they could be run more efficiently. But what we have seen is the burden of tax so high. And for me, as a Conservative, despite the fact we've obviously had issues with the Ukraine and fuel costs and all of the things that we have had, COVID, which obviously cost an absolute fortune, and then we had to borrow money for all of that. But you see, we're not going to get out of all of this unless we start really looking, you know, really looking ahead. And if there is some cash around, I mean, if you've come into the 40% tax rate, top tax rate, which isn't huge salary, but people will, you know, work hard and end up in a 40%, they're paying about 50-55% is taken out of their pocket. And it's not acceptable. You're not talking about massively high earners, the top 3% or anything. And we have got to really encourage growth. We've got to encourage entrepreneurs, like you were, small self-made business people. We need to be looking at incentives to make sure they're doing that. Well, at local level, they need to be looking at business rates and making sure that, you know, you can maybe exempt certain businesses that are starting up. And I think we need to start reversing this and really encouraging business and growth in the economy. And that will then, in fact, if we're lowering taxes, looking at corporation tax and other things, and then you're going to get other investment that comes into the country. And then that hopefully starts generating what we need to see.
Yeah, just over 50 grand is what you need to earn now to be pulled into that 40% tax bracket. Are you one of those people or not? Michael, your thoughts on it all?
So I think there's a couple of issues here. I mean, I would personally prefer to see it spent on public services. I think we've heard the mantra before that if you cut public services, they will become more efficient. I think what we've learned since 2010 is that's not really what happened. What we ended up with was backlogs in the Home Office. What we ended up with was an NHS that was really working at capacity before a pandemic came. Obviously, we've now put a lot more money into the NHS, but I think if you starve something for years and then flood it with cash, that is a message or a recipe for inefficiency, let's say. I think, though, it's important to talk about what the public think here, because the public overwhelmingly prefer an increase in spending to a reduction in tax. And we have to think about, what does that tell us about our politics in this society? Why would it be the case that the public want more money spent on public services, but both political parties, Labour and the Conservatives, are prioritising tax cuts? Now, to me, that suggests they are speaking to newspaper owners, they are speaking to rich business people who fund them, and not to the actual voters. I think a similar story can be told about foreign policy. In fact, the majority of the public want a ceasefire in Gaza. Both Labour and the Tories are saying, we will do whatever the Americans want. That's not a popular policy, but what it does do is reassure some very powerful people in this country that neither the Tories nor Labour are a threat.
I think one of the polls that you're referring to is the Tory peer Lord Ashcroft. He's saying basically a poll there that says 54% of voters apparently want this money to be spent on public services, not tax cuts. I've got a poll running on my Twitter. It's on the GB News Twitter. And yes, I know it's called X. I'm not stupid. It doesn't click with me, the X thing. Twitter, I call it that. Anyway, I've got a poll running on there. Currently, 68% of you say that you would prefer tax cuts. So you're the opposite side of the coin. Yeah. You know, for the record, just to be clear, I don't want to spend any more money on public services when wastage is running the way that it is in our public services. It's absolutely everywhere. So personally, before you start taking more money from me, Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt, if you're listening, start fixing some of the holes in the buckets rather than just chucking more cash into said bucket. What do you think to that? Ed says it's a no-brainer. Use this money to build up our armed forces, our national security, not our social security. Alan says I would rather have tax cuts because I think the public are better at spending the money than anybody, quite frankly, he says, within government. Alex says, can we just be sensible, use that extra money to pay down the debt and reduce the debt interest? Helen says there's no way the public services should get any more money at all until they've got rid of some of their top, highly paid management. John says we desperately need money for public services, potholes, etc., but the councils don't manage it wisely. Barry says, what about using this extra money to clean up our water supply? Well, Barry, what I'd say is, what about not giving some of these water execs the astronomical bonuses that they keep receiving when they're not really delivering in one of their key aspects when it comes to how we get rid of sewage? What about that? You could take that money and perhaps redirect it. Let me know your thoughts on that. After the break, I want to talk to you about mental health. Apparently, people under the age of 30 have been told that they're slacking because one day a week, apparently they're under pressure when it comes to mental health, and they can't be fully productive. What do you make to that? Is it all fair? Do we need to look after our mental health more? Or has mental health basically become the bad back? And yes, Stephen, I got your email. It says, Michelle, you wouldn't ever have had a bad back in your life because I bet you've never done a hard day's work. Oh, you're a harsh man. Don't even get me started about the paper round that I used to have. Don't even get me started. We've got that coming up after the break.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co on Dewbs on GB News. I was almost about to call the whole channel after myself. I think that's wishful thinking. Anyway, Baroness Jacqueline Foster still alongside me, as is Michael Walker. One of my viewers has just said, Michelle, what about all the tax situation in Scotland? It's even worse over there. You're absolutely right. There's quite a few additional bans actually in Scotland. I think as well, they've just introduced a higher ban very recently as well. You have my sympathy if it affects you. Anyway, look, there's lots I want to talk about tonight still, House of Lords. But before I do, let me ask you about mental health, right? A report based on a survey of 4,000 staff and their employers has found that Gen Z, so i.e. people under the age of 30, this is their words, not mine, slack off work at least one day a week due to mental health problems. Get this, the cost to the British economy is 138 billion, with a B, pounds. What do you make to this, Jacqueline?
Well, I'm not a happy person because I was in a position once, was some years ago, when I had to section somebody under the Mental Health Act.
Right.
And there is a vast difference between when you're looking at mental health issues of people who are hospitalised, have hugely serious complications. We see youngsters, obviously, with anorexia and various illnesses like that. And I think what I find most frustrating is people seem to think sometimes in the most flippant way that, oh, you know, I'm feeling a bit depressed today, so I've got a mental health issue. That is not a mental health issue. We all get frustrated. We will all suffer grief in our lives. We know that. And there has to be far more clarity about what this really is, because those who really need life and death decisions, really need treatment, are then in a position where they're down on a waiting list and down on a waiting list, waiting to see professionals. So I do think that this has to be looked at very seriously. And it's not just Gen Z, I don't think. I think there's been an issue now also, and it's escalated, I think, with people working from home during COVID. And a lot of younger people go, great, you've got a big house or a nice house and the kids and the garden and the dog, and it was really nice for a change. A lot of people really were in a little flat and then trying to work like that, and it was very, very, very hard for them.
Indeed, Michael.
Well, I think it's clear it's important that we're clear what this survey found. So it's not that people take a day off work a week or they slack off work. They say they find it unable to fulfil their full capacity once a week. They only take 6 of these days off as formal sick leave. So often on this show, we sort of discuss people taking more sick days. Actually, what this survey is showing is that people, you know, usually
they're not operating at their full capacity. They're not as productive as they are assumed and designed.
I mean, it's also a survey by a health insurance company, so it's not necessarily the most social scientific study.
But this point, I mean, it was literally just a couple of days ago, the amount of people, to Jacqueline's point, younger people, that were having stress leave, etc., because of anxiety, returning to the office, saying that they suddenly felt that they were being looked at and things like that. Do you worry that we're medicalising normal emotions?
So, in theory, I do. I understand the argument. I understand the argument that maybe we are sort of... people are being encouraged to be too sensitive and that sort of people used to have a stiff upper lip and maybe that was better for people. But then I look at my actual life, right, and I look at the people I know, and the problem I have with people who are close to me is not that they're too eager to get therapy, it's that they're not eager enough. You know, I know people who are, you know, they're not ready to be sectioned, right? There is a scale of degree here. But I know many people who are, I would judge them to be very depressed, and sort of I try and persuade them to get help. So I think if we say you should only go and get help if you're about to be sectioned, that would be a dangerous thing to imply. No. So I think probably the evidence suggests that mental health is getting worse. Why that is less clear. I think it might have a lot to do with social media. I think having an Instagram when you're sort of aged 14 is probably not that helpful for your development.
What they have actually established is a lot of younger people were working from home. And then the difficulty you have, if you then say, OK, you can all carry on working from home, the whole point of mental health and a job isn't just the job, is it? It's about interaction, it's about brainstorming, it's about your career, and it's about all of these things. And one thing they all agree on the medical profession is if you are out and about, even if you're older playing golf or whatever, it's the socialising that is a real benefit. Even if the job's hard, there's a camaraderie very often where you'll go out together and you'll be good chums together and you'll work together. And that's one of the greatest benefits. A job actually is one of the greatest benefits for mental health and for working from home, in my view, for most people. Some people run a business from home, but particularly younger ones, I think it's just a real no-no.
I don't think we necessarily need a sort of strong dichotomy here. I mean, I think it would be a mistake. I wouldn't want to work at home the whole time, but I think hybrid working works for a lot of people. You know, you work 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. I mean, I don't see how that would damage.
Well, I mean, if you're not running a business, if you're running a business,
different
that
question,
may
though,
not.
isn't it? For productivity,
I work for an airline. I'd have a hard job working from home if you wanted to go on your holidays. So would you. So would your surgeon who was doing whatever they were doing, or the pilots. And the bin man that collects our bins, they can't work from home. I think we need to get a realistic look at this.
Do we talk enough, I'll ask you this at home, do we talk enough about resilience, do you think? We talk a lot, don't we, about stress, anxiety, mental health, depression, and I'm not undermining any of those. You will be familiar with the fact that I've had my own mental health challenges, so I am not seeking to undermine it at all. But normal emotions, that's what they are. Life is not always easy. You get rejected from work. Your partner might turn out to be a wrong one and dump you. Someone, unfortunately, might die, whatever. Do you think we help people to manage those negative emotions enough or not? Get in touch and tell me after the break. I want to talk to you, though, about the House of Lords. They've started conversations now about the treaty when it comes to the UK and Rwanda. Is it time, some people are saying, it's time to scrap the House of Lords altogether? Others are saying it needs serious reform. Can't wait to hear what Jacqueline has to say about that. But tell me your thoughts too, and I'll see you in 2.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs and Co on GB News. I've got to say, I do really enjoy the conversations that we have in the break. We've just been covering it all. We've been covering spinal surgery, medication, you name it. I do like our break conversations, but I need to bring it back on air because tonight I want to talk to you about the House of Lords. One of my panel is a Conservative MEP and life payer, Jacqueline Foster. Now, we will know by now that the part of this Rwanda plan, and it's to do with the treaty. I have to make this clear to everyone at home. This is not the same thing that was being voted on in the Commons the other day when we had all of those amendments and all the rest of it. This is slightly different. This is it's like a complex kind of, is Rwanda a safe country? Is it not? And it's about whether or not that was all going to be ratified. Now, it was basically voted against, Jacqueline. That is the short version. How did you vote last night?
Well, I voted to take this forward. I think what you've got to remember, though, we do not have a majority. You've got to, I think, remember what the House of Lords is for, i.e. the second chamber. And it is not to have supremacy over the House of Commons. The House of Commons, where you have an MP, will always reign supreme in this system where they will call the shots, basically. But we're there to scrutinise and to police legislation that's coming through. It's done line by line. There's some great experts in there. They're not all ex-politicians, by the way. And so last night, as I said, we don't have a majority, so no single party does anyway, and has never had. And so we would have the Liberal Democrats, Labour Party, there's crossbenchers, there's some independents. So even though we had a good turnout, we couldn't actually win that vote.
And when people say, because many people, I mean, Nigel Farage, for example, is basically saying that everyone needs to be gotten rid of and the whole thing, essentially, other people are saying, let's make it an elected premise. Where are you on those kind of reforms?
Well, you know, I mean, if something is decided at some stage and people want an elected chamber, so be it. I think what they need to take into account is, do you still want to make sure that your Commons is the supreme chamber? Because what will your new elected chamber do? And it's only actually going to be able to do, it's only going to be doing actually what's being done at the moment. And we also stop any one party, in a way, having a majority. So there is good cross-party debate. It's hard for government, whichever colour, to actually get the stuff through sometimes. And very briefly, the cost of setting up an elected chamber, you're going to have representatives, decide which regions and constituencies they represent. They need to have a salary, they need to have a pension, they need to employ staff, they need to have an office, and I have to tell you, that would be financially hugely costly.
I mean, you've got to question as well the size of it, everyone, but Michael?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure the Lords is particularly cost-efficient at the moment, isn't it? Sort of one of the largest chambers in the world.
I think it's the largest second chamber after China.
Well, I think it might be the largest sort of
Yeah, but what
chamber,
you've got to remember...
not just second chamber, right? Because there's so many... How many people are in the Lords?
Oh, there's about 700 or something. There is only a proportion of that go in. Yeah. You are only given... You get a daily allowance. I'm not complaining about this. There's no salary or pension or anything. People know that when they go in. And you have a daily allowance which covers your accommodation if you're in London, when you're in London, because obviously people come from all over the country. We're not paid for secretarial staff. So if you wanted to have somebody to help, you'd have to take it out your allowance. And as I said, the conditions, if you had an elected chamber, it's not an excuse, it's just a fact. You're going to have to fund a second elected chamber and look at the cost of what it costs to run the Commons. That's all I would say, if you wanted an equivalent.
She makes a good point, Michael.
So I think there's...
would it be more efficient?
Well, I think there's one problem we haven't mentioned with the Lords, which is I think it gives people incentives, basically, to suck up to politicians or to particular politicians. So at the end of every Prime Minister's reign, they get to nominate people to the Lords who were most loyal to them.
No, but
right? And I think that creates a misincentive in politics. Also, I think we could look at the idea of a second chamber as an opportunity. I think lots of people don't feel that representation is good enough in this country, and you could quite easily have a second chamber that's elected by a different means to the Houses of Commons. So it could be, on a regional basis, it could be by proportional representation, and that might allow more different kinds of voices to.
Well, you've got regional representation. We're from right across the country.
Yeah, obviously from. Well, yeah, but that's only sort of by accident,
Don't forget, as I
right?
said, not all of us are politicians that have gone in. I mean, you've got people. Yeah, obviously you've got business people. I mean, I'm sitting next to some of the best legal brains, probably.
Maybe they could stand for election in a second chamber and see how impressed the public are with them.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying. But what you do have in there is a vast cross-section of expertise from all different fields,
Michael,
and we bring that in when we're doing debates. I'll go and sit in and listen to them, and doctors and surgeons and all sorts of people. So it's very interesting.
My viewer Mick says, Michelle, I've got the solution. Keep the Lords, he says, but get rid of the Commons. Blimey. Phil says, if all of the Lords were like Jacqueline, we'd be all right. But unfortunately, they are not. How can it be, asked Bernard, that an unelected body who are an opposed majority may be a fair system for the electorate? Look, keep your thoughts on that one coming in. I asked you, I did a poll, do you want tax cuts or do you want more investment in public services? 68.9% of you went for tax cuts and 31.1% of you want more investment in public services. John on Twitter says, well, basically, yes, we want better public spending, not necessarily more money. Those two things are not necessarily linked. Michael, Jacqueline, thanks for your time. Up next is Farage, and it's hosted by Chris Hope.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Storm Jocelyn sweeps through overnight, increasingly windy with heavy showers for many of us, although the wettest weather carried through on Tuesday is now clearing to showers and some longer spells of rain in the far northwest. It is in the far northwest where the strongest of the winds will be. And for many parts of the UK, we'll see wind gusts of 50 miles an hour, 65 near coasts. But for the north and west of Scotland, that's where we've got an amber warning, because overnight winds will gust up to 70 or 80 miles an hour. Yes, a bit more of a normal winter storm compared with Storm Isha, but the clear-up operation still continues with Isha, so Storm Jocelyn could lead to considerable further impacts. As we start Wednesday, there'll be some bright weather around. It will still be blustery.